and love starts happening out of that. Because, when you're fighting with people in the trenches and you're working hard, like there's just a bond, a camaraderie that's there that you can't get when your pastor says, "Hey, go on Thursday night and meet with brother so and so's house," and this is like, why are we doing this again? Like, you know what I mean? Anyway,
Jarrell Flowers, man, welcome to the Authentic Pastor Podcast.
come on, somebody, we here, let's go.
That's what's so fun about, we're here without a script in front of us, and we're just going to go and we're going to see where it goes. And man, there's always gold that comes out the other side of these conversations that we never anticipated.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
I mean, I listened to one that we did a few weeks ago yesterday, and Kelton, who produces this, played it for me. I'm like, man, I wish I would have heard that again a couple weeks ago, because I needed what that guest said to me. And I think I missed in the midst of the podcast and feeling like you got to say something. I missed hearing what that was Kyle Burkholder. And so anyone listening, you should listen to the podcast with Kyle Burkholder, and who's just an amazing pastor. But he just unleashed some things about identity that I'm still reeling from. I had a person yesterday listen to it and said, "Dude, I wrote a blog a couple years ago on that same issue, and I forgot I wrote it, and I forget who I wrote it to, but they sent it to me and said, if you can use this, share it, send it, do whatever you want with it." So this is striking a chord. This is striking a chord. When you and I talked about it, I knew it hit you in the heart. And even though you may not be, quote, Pastor Jarrell Flowers, but what is it that I know, but what is it that you do? Other people are listening, go, who the heck is Jarrell Flowers, man?
Yeah.
And so what is it that you do exactly? Let people know.
Yeah. So, greetings from San Antonio. My name is Jarrell Flowers, and I am married to Janelle Flowers. We got 3 kids, 3 girls actually, girl dad. So Naomi, Livy, and Adira. Our latest one was born in the midst of the pandemic. So, like many children in our era,
there was this thing about filling time and space,
right?
What are we gonna do with all our downtime? We're gonna make children.
Yeah. So I am a husband and father, and my wife and I, we started a community called the Rise Movement, and so essentially we empower creative leaders to build community, and we help them transform culture through creativity and the gospel. Like that's our thing. We love creativity. We believe that creativity and when it's coupled with the gospel has the power to change lives, change culture. So that's what we do, man. So we're all about supporting creative leaders, man. Specifically like people who do artistry and all of that. We feel like there's a need for community. That leader needs community around them, but then also, creating in community is also awesome too. So, yeah, that's what we do, man. We help, creative leaders build community around what they're doing, and help them to reach the city for Jesus. So,
well, I want to get into the nuance of what some of that means, the challenges of that, what you're experiencing in people's lives. But, it's so funny because when I ask guests to give us a little bit, I mean, they literally just give us a little bit, and that's not the whole story, right? It's not the whole story of who you are. It's not your identity, right? Sometimes it can be our identity. Like when we met a few years ago, we were both sharing a stage in Colorado Springs at a large event, and got a chance to connect. And it was a good connection. It just hasn't been able to be followed up like any of us like we always meet these great people back room in green rooms and backstage and have a few minutes just to connect. And some of those, I'm just being honest, sometimes I meet people and I don't really care if I ever talk to you again. And that's probably because I'm arrogant, right? And it's just like, and other times it's just like, you're not a really nice person, but I don't want to invest my life into getting to know you. You, on the other hand, um, man, we were able to go deep fast just
Mm-hmm.
in a few minutes, literally, even to the point where when we jumped on here, you saw, I'm going to move, you saw behind me that there's a whole row of guitars in there, but
Yeah.
they're not for show, right?
Okay.
That's just a few of the instruments. If you walk across my office into the studio, there's more guitars and a piano and a whole setup and the whole deal. And you're
Come
like,
on.
dude, I didn't know you were a musician. And I don't even know if, I can really say I'm a musician. I spent a lot of money on instruments. And so maybe I'm just a hoarder of guitars. Um, but those are things you just don't get to know when you see somebody once or twice or see things on the surface. Like, well, Jarrell does creative community for artists.
Mm-hmm.
And, but obviously there's so much more than that. You began with the important things of a husband and a girl dad, which I won't know how to be a girl dad. I'm one of four brothers. I've got two sons.
Mm.
My if I ever had a girl, she would still be living in her bedroom locked there because I don't trust boys. And because I as one. And
Right.
but this this artist community, where, where where did you see what did you see in creatives as the greatest need to cultivate a community where they could live and collaborate and share and strengthen each other? Where did you see
Mm.
a hole, something lacking, missing? What was the impetus in your heart that said, okay, we need to give some time, attention, and resource to this?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I saw it in me first, and
Okay.
that's kind of how the whole Rise movement thing started, man. So when we met, it was I think it was it 2018? I think it was 2018, somewhere back then.
I think it was, yeah.
Like I had my wife and I we had just started Rise. It was fresh, man, and so
Yeah, it was brand new then.
yeah, and so kind of the reason why I started it is before I started Rise, I was working at a church full time, um,
In what
and
capacity?
so I was doing. I started off as a youth minister, and then as time went on, this kind of happens when you're working with churches. Like when you're working for a church, the responsibilities expand and expand and expand. And I was happy for them to expand. So by the time
I've never heard of such a thing where you just keep getting more job duties.
it's wild, it's wild.
That's amazing.
So, so I started off as a youth pastor. Ended up, by the time I was done, I was overseeing the youth ministry, children's ministry. There was a worship arts thing. There was, yeah, the worship ministry, dance ministry. It was a lot of stuff happening that I was overseeing, and I was touring. So that the year before to close out 2017, I did like 60 dates um, as an independent artist while I was trying to do all that kind of stuff. So I was out close to 100 days out of that year, and I was just um, going into 2018, dude. I was burned out, and I didn't really delegate well. Like, yeah, it was a bad situation. I kind of lean towards like perfectionism, and my natural tendencies to lean towards perfectionism. So, perfectionists don't delegate, and I was just like, it was tough, man. So I ended up uh, going through this space in my life, man, where I fell into some. It was I wasn't clinically diagnosed as depressed, but it was
Ooh,
definitely there was definitely some suicidal thoughts happening, and I ended up telling my wife, and my wife was like, "Look, we're we don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with this." So she was like, "Maybe you should just invite some friends over." So we invited some friends over, and I didn't really have community as a pastor at that time. I didn't have anybody that I felt like, man, I can go to this person without them looking at me crazy. You know what I'm saying? Without them giving me a side eye. So I was the youngest guy on my elder team. I was an elder at that point. Youngest guy there. I always felt like the squeaky wheel. Uh, and so I didn't really feel like I had the relational currency to dive deep with them and talk about, hey, these are my issues. And then also the people that were serving under me in the ministries that I was overseeing, I didn't really feel like I could talk to them about stuff either. A lot of those people, a lot of them were people that I was trying to disciple. They were like, you know, either new to the faith or it was crazy. And so yeah, I just felt like, man, I don't have anybody to talk to, especially like with my creative journey. What I found out later on is that as a creative, you can have highs. The highs are really high and the lows are really low. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so and you can come off of this high mountain peak moment and then come back down off of that mountain peak moment, and you're just like, man, this is life. Like I was, I'd go from like speaking to thousands, and then I'm like mopping floors, and I'm like, is this really my calling? Like, what's happening right now? It was so
Dude, we
weird.
got to pause. We just got to pause a minute because you just unpacked a barrage of garbage, right? That there's anybody listening who can't relate to what you're saying right now because they think, well, I'm not a creative, I'm a pastor, okay? Because pastors come in all kinds of shapes, forms, and sizes. I don't care what your title is, but you just said a couple things that I had to jump out of frame just to grab a notebook and a pen. That first of all, perfectionists don't delegate. We're going to get back to that, I hope. But the whole idea that the highs are really high and the lows are really low, and I know what that's like. I spent 150 days on the road for 20 years
Mm.
while pastoring
Ooh,
a church, and people go, "How do you
wow.
do that?" Well, I've got an amazing team, and we could do that because we built the church with the understanding that your senior pastor is never going to be here, and they seem to buy into it. So I sold it well anyway, and I've been at that church for 27 years, and every time I try to quit, they keep offering me more staff or more money. So, which is amazing. I'm still underpaid, and they keep giving me a raise. And but now I'm not traveling.
Yeah.
So COVID hits.
Hmm.
Amidst the time that COVID hits, I deal with some real health crisis in my life, and all of that means Tim is kind of grounded,
Mm.
and I'm struggling because I don't have many highs left anymore.
Mm. Hmm.
I like the light. I like the mic. I like the applause because it's a good place for me to put on this false persona. So you go from a high to a low, and then what do? You look for that next high, man. I need another
Right.
hit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so instead of ever getting myself to a place of true identity in Christ, my calling in Christ, as opposed to my calling as a pastor, which I poo poo that idea, and it makes some people really irritated because you mean I'm not called to be a pastor? Listen, your calling is to Christ. Your gifting is a pastor. I don't know where your assignment is, but let's get them in perspective. And
Mm.
so I could at least get off the airplane and come home and get another small hit in my little church and waiting for the next gig. And now pretty soon I don't have any more gigs. And
Mm.
during COVID, no one's booking you to speak to a stadium of 30,000 people. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
There's not a gathering of 300 people. There's no little short injection of heroin into your ego that you need. And so for
Mm.
me, the low got really low, even to the point where now it's eroding. And I'm not blaming circumstance. It's really about me, allowing it to get to that point. I would say, addicted to my calling, addicted to my title,
Mm,
addicted to all of that. And so I went through this really dark, dark time and of wondering who I am. Who is God? And am I really serving him?
yeah.
Am I really united with Christ, or have I lost all of that for the sake of the gospel? And do I even understand that anymore? And maybe that's just me. I doubt that's just me.
Mm,
And but when you say the highs are really high and the lows are really low, um, that seems to be where that moment of your crisis came. You said you had to learn it in you first.
yeah. Yeah. And that was, you know, that crisis was kind of a catalyst for like creating something that I needed and that other people needed also. And I didn't
How
know
hard
I didn't know how much people needed it until I actually put it out there, and shared my story.
how hard was that first? I mean, because you have to internalize it and deal with it. How hard was that for you to confess and admit to yourself? Did that take a while, or was it pretty quick?
Yeah, I feel like I'm very introspective and I'm a deep thinker. So I just be having stuff rolling around in my head all the time. like like ideas and possibilities and like
Well, that's your
what is the
creative. That's your
meaning?
creative gene,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, the what is the meaning of life? All of that. So it's just like all meshed together in there somewhere. I think the hardest thing was just admitting to my wife, like I'm not at a healthy place because as the man, I feel like, man, I have to be the rock for the family. I have to do this and do that, and how am I going to admit to my wife, like, yeah, I'm not doing good right now. And so to that degree, so we have things that we feel comfortable with confessing, and then there's like the uncomfortable things to confess. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, let's talk about the uncomfortable things and make you uncomfortable, because isn't that funny that the person who loves you the most in life,
Yeah,
your partner, is sometimes the hardest person to confide in.
yeah,
There's just irony in that we all deal with. I mean, if anyone was listening, going, "Oh, that's not me and my partner," okay, I'm going to call BS on that, and because maybe you're not being, and I'm not saying some people aren't better at it than others, but I think there are just some things that we all shade
yeah.
the truth. I'm dealing with a friend right now, and that I told him the other day they're struggling with some marital issues, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to get honest with you." And when he says that, I know that there's more.
Right.
I
Yeah,
know you haven't shared it all yet.
yeah.
And so I challenged him on that. I said, "If you've told me everything," and his response is, "Bro, I have." And then I get a text this morning, "Dude, I shared some things last night and I got really real." Just a minute. You told me the other day, though, that you'd already told me everything you were going to share. So now you're sharing new things that you think you're really real about. Listen, God only works in truth and light. God can't work in shadow. So,
Mm,
like I tell couples when they come to me for counseling, like, "Hey, we're going to put it all on the table. And if
yeah,
you put 99% on the table and you keep 1% to yourself, if you come back to me 6 weeks or 6 months later and go, 'Hey, there was this one thing I didn't share,'
yeah.
you just screwed up all the work we've done for 6 months. And now you've lost all credibility because you didn't lay it all out there with your spouse and the person working with you because you were afraid of that one little thing. And now it's come back to bite you in the butt,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah,
So what are those uncomfortable 1% things? And you got the brakes, man. I always tell guests, I told you this when we began, you got the brakes on this conversation. What are the uncomfortable things that are really hard to share?
yeah. I mean, well, you were talking about identity earlier, and I think the things that we identify, that we place our identity in, that we fall short. We also fall short in whatever that is for anybody is that's going to be the hardest thing to share. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
that whole, the thing about feeling like, man, I'm having suicidal thoughts. Well, part of the reason why that was hard for me to share is because like I always put my identity in the fact that I was an optimist, able to see the best in every situation, and I was that for my family. My family's general. There's a whole lot of different kind of yeah. My family's wired in a whole lot of different ways, right? And out of all of us, like I'm the one who's generally like the most optimistic. Yes, we can, that kind of deal. And so when I put my identity in that, and then I have to go back and be like, oh, you know what? Actually, I don't really see a way out of this. Um, to the point where I've thought about taking my own life. Like it's about as like non-optimistic as you can be. You know what I'm saying? And so that was, but my identity was there. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like that. It's like that for anybody, man. I mean, I think one of the hardest things, with people that because I talked to a lot of creatives and working with them through things, and it really just does come down to identity. It comes down to identity. It comes down to like, who do you who do you perceive yourself to be? Whoever you perceive yourself to be, and you feel like you're falling short in that area, or you feel like it's the people around you are not gonna accept that. Um, God works in truth and light, like you said. So if you're trying to hide these things and trying to, it becomes difficult, man. And those are hardest conversations.
I'm thinking out loud here about the way you get to express your struggles and your fears and your breakthroughs and everything in a little bit different way than maybe I do. Like I would say, and, and I don't know how people will understand this, but like I think whether it be in the community, whether it be on stage, you get the chance and your role to lead and impact people. In some ways, you really are just as much in a pastoral position that I am by far, but you get to put your pain into rhyme, man. You get to put your pain into lyric where,
Yeah.
maybe it's more acceptable for you to take that experience and put it into words, um, behind your mic and your platform than it is for me. If
Mm,
it's not, and maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm just thinking out loud, like I said, but I don't think people would be as shocked, offended, bewildered, at you in a performance, publicly talking about some of the things we're talking about right now, as opposed to maybe a person in a pulpit.
yeah, I think that there is some leeway, man. I think that there
And it
is.
might not be as much as I think there is.
Yeah, like so for me, there is leeway, right? Because there's a perspective from the people about what a pastor is supposed to be and all that kind of stuff, which is okay. Um, but for an artist, there is a different perspective. But when you jump in the Christian, you jump in the Christian circles and stuff like that, there's people still have this idea that you're supposed to be. Again, there are certain things that you can talk about. And oh man, I'll give you a great example. Like, there's stuff that you can talk about that seems okay. Like, oh man, I was just did right now because mental health is a big deal in the world today. So a pastor can be like, man, I'm struggling with anxiety, man. I'm just struggling with anxiety. And people can be like, oh, yeah, praise God, man. Yeah, thank you for being real and honest, bro, because we're all out here struggling with anxiety. And now there's a touch point, right? Um, and and so right now, it's socially acceptable for a pastor to
Mm-hmm.
be like, "Yeah, I struggle with anxiety," and people can applaud that, be like, "Man, he's so real." Because you know, I guess in times people wouldn't uh, admit to that, but there's
Certain seasons, yeah.
yeah, so it's socially acceptable right now, like something that that people aren't gonna applaud, you know what I'm saying, from a stage is, anything, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
all that, anything that has to do within those three, people are just the church is still going to be like, oh brother, come on now, you get right, you know what I mean? And
Even though they may be having the same battle, right? I
yeah,
mean, not everyone wants their pastor naked on stage, right?
yeah.
And so, you can do a small strip tease, but don't take it all off, which is absolutely fine. Which
My
is
guy.
I don't want to even have that word picture with you on my screen anymore. But the you can and that's fine because you don't need to get that. There's a difference between authenticity and vulnerability. I had that conversation with my friend
Yeah.
Mark Ostrecker a few weeks ago, and it's
Hmm.
really, really a powerful conversation, and challenged some of my thinking and opened my eyes to some other things that you can be authentic without being like
Hmm.
completely naked on stage,
Hmm.
and you should. That's called discernment and wisdom.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But you do need a place. You do need a place to do that, which I think is part of why your communities are so important. But isn't it interesting in what you said is that sometimes an audience outside of the Christian perspective or Christian worldview, that open transparency is what endears them to your music.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's the very reason they listen. It's not just because you can lay down a beat. There's something in your lyric, something in your rhyme where they say, man, that guy gets me.
Hmm.
And isn't it funny that you would hope with grace that's how the church would also respond, because numbers don't lie. Statistically that 1 in 5 people in your church, 1 in 5 adults at least, are going to deal with mental health issues in their life this year.
Mm.
And yet,
Mm.
May comes around, mental health month, October, another mental health awareness time, and yet we never talk about it because we're of the opinion that if you've got Jesus, you don't have mental health issues, which is
Mm.
just which is just
Yeah.
that's a lie we love to tell ourselves so we can bury that, which is again an issue of identity.
Yeah. 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 And when you're talking about, uh, initially you were talking about the Christian artists and the perspective, I guess the expectation of people, and yeah, man, I think that artists, you know, artists thrive at the very edge of what's acceptable. I think you know what I'm saying when they're living there, because I think that's part of the wiring of being a creative. It's very, being a creative is very like, it's prophetic in nature. So you are looking ahead and kind of like bringing the future into the present. And that's why I really feel like, creativity is such an important part of just church life in general. When you don't have creatives, you kind of lose that edge of innovation and intuitiveness, like all of that. But because of that being the wiring of a creative, you're gonna find a person who's really pressing into their creativity. They're gonna be on the edge of the boundary, so to speak. because they're trying to go into the future. You know what I mean? And they're pressing into that reality. And so yeah, there's not a lot of people that like that. I think the audience, the Christian audience, a lot of times can be guilty of making sure everything's safe, everything's nice, neatly packaged. So somebody who's pressing into their creativity can feel alienated, even isolated, judged by Christian audiences. You know what I'm saying? And that I've felt that when 2020 happened, and I was talking about like stuff that was going on and all of the stuff that was happening in 2020. Uh, bro, people who all the safe people, you know what I mean, that didn't really want to have those conversations. You know what I mean? Even and I'm talking like from a biblical worldview. I'm talking about like, hey, let's really, but people don't like that. They don't like having those conversations. They just want to talk about, let's stick to Jesus, brother. Let's stick to this and let's stick to that. I'm like, bro, like I see an opportunity for the gospel here.
Yeah.
We're talking about social justice issues and all of that kind of stuff. Like I see an opportunity for the church to be the church and represent well in this space, but that's the on the edge. You know what I'm saying? So
Which is funny. That should not be the edge. On a
shouldn't
side
be.
note,
Yeah.
my watch just went off.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is because like I'm really enjoying this conversation, but it says your heart rate is above 120.
Okay.
And I'm like, what the heck? I've never seen that message before in my life. So I think it's just the fact that you've got me excited. I don't think I'm dying behind the mic.
Oh my
Like if I all of a
God.
sudden slump over and fall off my chair, then somebody ought to call 911 on this call between you or Kelton who's listening. But I'm
Yeah.
just being funny. But it did say that your heart is above 120 beats a minute, and I'm like, dude, that's probably not a good thing. So.
All right.
It could be the 19th cup of coffee I've had in the first 5 hours of the day. But
Sure.
you know, there, I think one of the reasons, from human nature that people really struggle with, either be creative or people in a pastoral perspective, pastoral role, crossing that line that we're uncomfortable with, is because it's holding a mirror to us. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily uncomfortable with you struggling with that. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that you're making me have to confront my own
Mm-hmm.
issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the little cliche: a pastor's job is to inflict how's that go?
Comfort the
To
disturbed, to
comfort.
disturb
That's
the
right.
comfortable.
Disturb the
Yeah.
comforted. Right. Exactly. And which makes people squirm. And it's not because, did you hear what our pastor said today? That person's she's a heathen, right? No, they said something that I have been burying, that I don't even deal with myself. I can't tell it to the person who loves me the most. I just carry this guilt and this shame
Mm-hmm.
around because I'm not supposed to have it. I'm not supposed to have these problems because Jesus was supposed to come into my life and remove all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, this will be a heretical statement, but Jesus doesn't remove all your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus comes in and gives you the strength to remove your stuff. And that's not because you are the God in and of yourself. It means if his divine power has given us everything we need, then at some point the responsibility is up to you.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't going to just pray it all away. You can't just worship it and praise it all away. I believe in
Yeah.
praising through my pain, but I also believe in getting really real with myself and doing some inner work with God living in me to tackle issues one by one. And I never like it when someone holds a mirror to my face.
Yeah.
I'm always going to be defensive, and I'm always going to then blame somebody, and I'm going to make them the scapegoat, whether that be the artist, whether they be the pastor, whether it be the person, the counselor, the friend, right? Blessed are the wounds of a
Mm,
friend.
yeah.
But it erodes friendship for a while until I finally go, oh man, dude, you remember 10 years ago when I told you to, screw off and you confronted me and I haven't talked to you since? Thank you for doing that. Even though I haven't talked to you in a decade now, because it really wasn't about you.
Yeah.
That was about the stuff I was dealing with.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And I think that's why in this day and age, the church is poised for a great revival. Like you said, man, what a great opportunity for the gospel. It's an
Yeah.
opportunity for the gospel, but it's going to require, you know, our pastors, our musicians, our worship leaders, our creatives, anybody in that kind of role of influence or leadership to be more authentic with themselves and with others, no matter the price that may take, because you're either going to pay now or you're going to pay later.
Yeah.
So you might as well pay the price now, even if it costs you some, gigs, a job, some relationships.
Yeah.
Is so much better to be free inside and authentic than it is continue to wear that mask of what people want, because you're never going to help them through their own struggle unless they can see it in you. Never.
Mm, mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Yeah, that's hard to do when as an artist sometimes I'll just speak for me. Like one of the things that I've struggled with is, and I'm even processing. This is something that I'm processing even now. Like uh, I've struggled with the need to feel understood. You know what I mean? And so, in a clear way, and because I love God, I love the church. I don't want to feel like I'm misrepresenting the gospel, misrepresenting people. I want to be understood, and so, and I think that's for a lot of different artists too, right? Like when you put out something, you know art communicates, and you want it to communicate. Uh, and that, I guess this would go for pastors and speakers and all that kind of, like, you want to know that you're communicating the ideas that you're trying to communicate, right? Um,
Yeah.
and
In
so
30 minutes, right? In 25
yeah,
minutes.
yeah, or if you're a songwriter in like two and a half, you know
Three,
what
I was
I'm
going to say
saying?
3 minutes.
Like,
Yeah. Right.
yeah. So it's difficult when somebody then, for me, when somebody critiques and says, "Ah, man, like what you said there was da da da," and my first reaction is like, what you're saying is not what I meant. So do I need to say something, like, you know what I mean? And internally, like, do I need to say something different? Do I need to
Yeah.
craft it this way?
My first reaction is shut up.
Yeah.
I'm
But
already done listening. Right.
yeah, yeah, like the scriptures come up, where Paul's saying, if basically if he was a slave to people, he wouldn't be a servant of Christ. You know, he says, I forgot exactly how it goes, but paraphrasing it, he's saying that, if I'm like, I'm not gonna be able to serve both. Like at some point, there's gonna be a point where what God wants and what people want are at
Yeah.
odds, and I'm gonna go with God. You know what I mean? And so I've had to ask myself, man, why do I feel like I have to be like? Why do I feel like it's a personal blow, a personal attack, if I'm not fully understood? Do what place do have I given to the opinions of other people? Has that been a god in my life? Have I built an altar to the opinions of other people? Um, am I sacrificing myself, my creative genius, on that altar?
Mm.
Um, so just processing that, man. A lot of it really does have to do with, like, you know, accepting the fact that being creative is very much so prophetic. And when you look at the prophets in scripture, like they just knew they were gonna get rejected. You know what I'm saying? Like they were like, well, this is the word of the Lord,
And they're looking for an exit.
right,
Where's the closest exit, man?
literally, man.
I'll
Elisha.
tell you the other hard part about it. The other hard part about it, it's a reality because I have sacrificed my identity for the acceptance of others.
Hmm.
And you know, I am the first to admit it. That's the problem with teaching on authenticity is you have to talk about your inauthenticity, and
Yeah.
which really
Hmm.
sucks when God gives you that assignment. Like, hey, I want you to talk about authenticity, but first you're gonna just, you're gonna bare your soul. Oh,
Hmm.
thanks a lot. That's going to cost me something. And for pastors, you know what they're afraid of? It's going to cost them a paycheck.
Hmm.
It's going to cost them their livelihood. And
Yeah.
that's a very real fear.
Hmm.
Um, and it's unfortunate that our performance is tied to that, which might go back to, I don't want to get on a rabbit trail here, but it might be the fact that our role as pastors have become more of CEOs than really shepherds.
Yeah.
Did we just go down a rabbit hole? The
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure in my life, and I'll just use me, that I was ever really expected to shepherd people as much as I am called to lead an organization
Hmm.
and grow it, build something substantial that makes headlines and people want to talk about, even to the point where they're talking more about me and more about the church than they are talking about Christ.
Hmm.
And so that house of cards can come tumbling down real fast
Hmm.
when your authentic self is exposed for everyone to see. People love to throw rocks at that kind of thing. You know, I feel bad for the creative, the artist, the pastor, whoever it might be, that came out in complete, just unashamed authenticity
Hmm.
to pay like a public price for that when it should be applauded. It should be applauded. So I want to talk about your community,
Yeah.
because when I think about going back to what you said about being able to admit that um, with your bride, and then needing a place to do that. Let's just be realistic that sometimes the pulpit is not the place to do that. Um,
Hmm.
I fear for young pastors who don't have the experience or the maturity, wisdom, discernment, whatever, to listen to a podcast like this and then all of a sudden have a laundry list they're going to
Right.
unroll on a Sunday morning. Don't do
Hmm.
that. Let's just, Jarrell and I are going to be in agreement here. Don't self sabotage and do that.
Right.
And, you built a safe space and place where your community could establish true connection, true community without fear. That's what you're working on.
Yeah.
That's what your tribe needs. That's what pastors need. It's what we all need.
Hmm.
That's why we'd be better off as congregations to spend 75% of our energies building small groups and life groups than we are putting together a weekend performance. But
Hmm.
how is that going? What are you experiencing? What are you learning? Where has been the joy in that, and how have you had to adjust to make sure that people feel that openness
Yeah.
without shame?
Yeah. So there's a few things that go into that. One, I'll just kind of share the journey of like when we started in 2018. We started. Um, I had a couple of people over at the house, because I was dealing with all the things. We invited a couple of people over at the house, and I was like, man, I need this. And then I did something that I probably wouldn't do again had I had another chance at it. I actually put it on Facebook and was like, hey, creatives, would y'all be interested in a community? Here's what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. And it there's a lot of people
Exploded.
that
Yeah.
responded to that, right? And
Yeah.
so I ended up having to go. It ended up becoming something that it was not intended to be for. I need a community, and it became an event. So we had once a month gatherings, and I felt responsible for these people who were just like, man, I need, because they were essentially saying, yeah, I need community, I need, you know, shepherding essentially, yeah, as a creative. So I was like, man, so we started meeting like once a month, and it became an event. And, so we'd be meeting at our house, and we'd have these house concerts, and we meet at parks and have barbecues. And so it just became this like 50, 60, 70 people, right? Come, at these gatherings. And what I found out was that I was, I just traded ministries
Mm.
instead of doing like instead of doing worship and overseeing all these different things. Now I'm overseeing this one group of creatives, and it was kind of closer to what I felt like God wanted me to do, but it wasn't like what I needed. And so we were doing things once a month all the way up until a few months before COVID actually hit. And as bad as COVID was, it was a kind of a reset for us.
Good.
So
Yeah.
we started, at the end of 2019, there was a few groups that were kind of forming organically within our bigger community. So people were coming and they were bringing their friends, right? And this leader would come and he'd bring his friends, and so it's started kind of happening that way. One group was forming, and so when 2020 hit, we just started doing Zoom, and I started doing Zoom specifically with that group. So we started doing discipleship stuff, and we were going over, we were just going over some discipleship tools, which was awesome. But again, I kept running into the wall of, man, I can only recreate what I have seen and what I know. You know what I mean? And so what have I seen? I've seen events and I've seen discipleship classes. You know what I'm saying? Like that was my framework for ministry.
Yeah.
And
Most of us don't. Most of us, I think it's fair to say, a lot of us have not been in a true discipleship setting,
mhm, mhm,
right?
yeah,
We're so good. Somewhere there must have been a verse in the Gospels where Jesus told his disciples, hey, get out the guitar, let's draw a crowd. Because
yeah.
that seems to be our MO, man. And
That's
let's
right.
draw a crowd because we think, well, Jesus drew crowds, so we got to draw a crowd. Most of Jesus' ministry took place in a huddle.
Mhm,
I have to tell my small group leaders all the time because I know my propensity is to draw a crowd. Because if
mm,
more people come, I must be doing something really well.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
once again, there's my little hit, there's my little fix, that's my little injection, right? So
Mhm,
I have to constantly, every year, every semester in our church, tell our small group leaders, listen, once your small group gets to 10 to 12, you have to divide.
yeah.
You have to, because
Mhm,
the thing that connected you, the thing that cultivated discipleship will erode almost immediately when you get above that small group dynamic. And really, a good small group is 6 to 8 people. But
mhm,
see, in ministry, we think 6 to 8 is a failure. So we
mhm.
go to this number 12 because Jesus said 12. Okay, but I'm not Jesus, right? If Jesus can
Yeah.
handle 12, I can probably handle 2. So you all of a sudden have this event that's growing into another event to produce. It's another opportunity in some ways to perform.
Mhm,
It's a public face. It's something that takes your time to put together.
mhm.
but it's not actually accomplishing what you had hoped it would. And so I
Yeah,
think that's when you say COVID was a good reset. I think it was a good reset for a lot of us who unfortunately now are
yeah.
gravitating back towards get out the guitar, let's draw a crowd. So how did you
Hmm.
do that?
Hmm.
Did people buy into that? Were they skeptical of doing that? Were they comfortable, or were they really craving getting back to some level of intimacy and accountability?
Yeah, so they definitely were. So when we were doing Zoom, like I said, in 2020, we started doing this discipleship class things, and it was great for what it was. These guys were like super faithful, but yeah, there was that, man. How do we connect as spiritual family? Um, there's a quote that I use a lot that says the body of Christ isn't supposed to be like a family. We're supposed to be a family,
Hmm.
and so that's what people are really looking for. Acts 2 expressions of the church, man.
Yeah.
That's really what it boils down to. Um, and there's not a lot of that because there's a lot of people who are kind of focused on performance. A lot of ministries are focused on um, performances, planting. When you talk about church planting, they're focused on planting services instead of planting the gospel. And so there's a lot of with that. It People are so used to churches and church organizations saying, "Hey, come over here because I need you to do my thing. I need you to do my thing that God's called me to do." instead of instead of saying, "Hey, what does God call you to do? How can we be a support system around you? How can we be the community that helps you be on mission for God?" And
Yeah, doesn't that gives people an opportunity? You say that individual expression that gives people an opportunity. There's a reason that 80% of the people or 20% of the people do 80% of the work in the church, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
because we haven't created a platform for every person to have a job and to
hmm
express their true gifting and their identity. We just want them to support our thing, and especially as pastors to come along and say, how can I release your potential? I think that's what equipping the saints for the work of service means.
yeah, yeah,
I get to release your potential into something, even if that means now you're so busy in the kingdom, in your gospel expression, that you don't have time for my thing on the weekend
hmm
anymore. My gathering that I'm calling everybody to is a mark of success because it was large and notarized.
hmm
So,
yeah.
man, that is so much different of a emphasis that you're doing, Jarrell.
Yeah, and the community, because when we say a lot, like we don't plant churches, we plant the gospel, and churches emerge from that.
Hmm.
So we find
That's
a
the, that's a significant distinctive to ponder for a
yeah,
bit. Yeah.
yeah. So we're looking at every person as identifying as a missionary because Jesus is a missionary. So if you're in Christ, you have that identity as a missionary. And if I'm helping somebody to plant the gospel, and especially like using their creative giftings and talents to do that, where that cross section of, hey, how has God wired you, crosses with the Great Commission of going, preaching the gospel, and making disciples, that intersection right there is where we want people to go and release, uh, release the kingdom, man. And so yeah, like we look at everybody as a missionary because Jesus is a missionary, and if they are planting the gospel, people are going to come around them to help them plant the gospel, the right people, and that's what it means to be the church in the world. And the community is excited and more bought in. They're tied in with it because it's a collective mission, and love starts happening out of that because when you're fighting with people in the trenches and you're working hard, like there's just a bond, a camaraderie that's there that you can't get when your pastor says, "Hey, go on Thursday night and meet with brother so and so's house," and this is like, why are we doing this again? Like, you know what I mean? Anyway, rabbit trail.
Do you think I'd love people to check out, your work. What website can they go to?
Yeah, we rise dot city. So
We
that'll
rise dot city.
city. Hmm.
Is when they go there, is there a way they can see what you do that would be transferable? Because I think everything you've talked about, the local church and the local pastor need to consider, like, how can we adapt this in some way, shape, or form into our ministry? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, if I were going to go there, I'd be looking for that, because I think what you're doing could be contagious and catalytic. And so, I hope people
Mm,
listening begin to consider those principles and go, okay, how can we get smaller? How can we get smaller to create that connection, that community, give people individual expressions of their gifting to, share the gospel, share Jesus, and see a greater expression of the church arise or rise from
mm,
it. And
yeah, yeah. Just if you go there, I mean, you'll see like our story, kind of how we got started and everything. And yeah, it just honestly just contact. There's a contact page on there. Just contact this man. I'm having these kind of conversations and uh, in person Zoom conversations about this kind of stuff all the time, and
yeah, I
that's our
hope I don't. I
passion.
hope I don't. I hope I don't bury you in contact emails from
Yeah,
this. At the
no,
same time,
no, you're
at the
good.
same time, man, I hope I do. So,
Yeah.
the greater thing the greater thing for all intents and purposes of this podcast that I heard you say that is so germane to our project is for pastors to recognize that you need to be intentional about finding that community,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
may be outside of your walls, more than likely is. And because authenticity and loneliness grow together, and I think can only be helped or healed through intimacy and accountability, which only
Hmm.
comes in small community of true
Yeah.
connections where trust is established and built and roots grow deep.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful, man. And it's possible. It's actually possible to find the same. Find that group within the people that you're serving
Absolutely. Sure it
with.
is. Yeah.
It doesn't feel. It feels counterintuitive sometimes, especially if you got the idea of, hey, I'm only going to be accountable to somebody higher than me, and if you got that
Hmm.
idea about the body of Christ, it's going to be hard to find that community. You have to go to the Pope or somebody. The
So
chain of command just keeps going up and up and
what
up.
you just said what you just said was, hey, knock yourself off your own high horse. Take yourself
Hmm.
down off the pedestal that people have put you on, that you like being on, because I like being on a pedestal. It feels good, but it's
Hmm.
not the most efficient, effective, and beneficial way of
Right.
leading the body of Christ. Dude, you've given me an hour of your valuable time, and I don't take that lightly. So I thank you for it. And I hope people will check out werise.city
Yeah.
and see what you're doing. And I look forward to having you back at a different time because I think there's more we can explore.
Dude, absolutely. Thank you for the conversation, man, and the opportunity. Looking forward
Yeah.
to replaying it.
Yeah, man. My privilege. God bless you, brother.
All right. Bless you, man.